Do you want to become the ultimate spellcaster? Or maybe you just want to increase the potency of not only your spells, but also the spells of your party members. What if I told you there was an archetype that allows you to do both of those very easily in War of Immortals? Hello, team players. It's time to talk about the Wildspell. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, this is mythic. We can't use that. The great thing about these archetypes in War of Immortals is that you can use them during regular play. The only thing is, you have to remove anything that mentions mythic points. And the great thing about this particular archetype is that there are a bunch of feats that don't require mythic points at all, meaning you can use them in regular play in their full glory. Now that that's out of the way, let's dive in. And of course, we gotta start with the Wildspell dedication. You gain the Spell Surge Focus spell. You create a 10-foot emanation around you that can have one of 4 effects. If you choose the Interference effect, then all creatures in the area get a +2 circumstance bonus on saves against mental effects. If you choose the Mana Well effect, then anytime an ally would have to roll a flat check to cast a spell, they automatically succeed, such as like from the stupefied condition. With the Overpower Resistance effect, every time a spell would affect a creature in your aura, you can ignore an amount of that creature's resistance equal to your level. This applies to all damage the spell deals, including persistent damage and the ongoing effects of the spell. This doesn't allow you to ignore immunities. And finally, with the Ward effect, anytime a spell would damage a creature in the area, you can reduce that damage by your level. And again, this applies to all damage the spell deals, including persistent and ongoing effects of the spell. The best ones here are probably the Ward and Interference, because Interference applies to any mental effect, not just spells. So if an enemy tries to frighten you with an ability, like a feat, then boom, you've got a +2 to that. And the Ward is really, really good for reducing damage. The only problem with the other two is that Stupefied isn't that common of a debuff. And the problem with Overpower Resistance is that they have to be pretty close to you to use it. I mean, it's great if you're going up against melee enemies that are close to you, but other spellcasters, no. So, I'm not a huge fan of Mana Well just because it is something that you have to be in your aura for, and it's only a 10-foot emanation. But if you take the next feat I'm going to talk about, it does become better. Next, of course, we have Extend Surge. If your Spell Surge aura is active, which is what a lot of these feats are going to require, you can spend an action to increase the radius of your aura by 30 feet until the start of your next turn. But where this becomes really broken is if you are using the Mythic system, because you can spend a Mythic point to increase the aura's radius to 60 feet until the start of your next turn, and then 30 feet until the spell ends, which effectively means that everyone is in your aura for one round, and then a lot of people are in your aura for the rest of the spell. Effectively, you can affect a lot more creatures with your Spell Search aura, which is pretty broken, especially considered the other feats in this archetype. Our next feat for level 14 is going to be Invigorating Surge. If your Spell Search aura is active, you can grant temporary hit points to one creature in your aura equal to your level. In addition, if you are using the Mythic system, you can spend a Mythic point to grant these temporary hit points to creatures up to half your level. Of course, all of them still have to be in your aura, but that's like, at best, 7 creatures, which means you're giving your entire party temporary hit points, which is pretty nice. These temporary hit points last for as long as the target or targets is in the aura. Granted, it's going to be hard to get all your allies in your aura unless you use the previous feat first, but otherwise, temporary hit points is always pretty nice. I won't lie. Especially if your allies are low on health. This is a good feat, it's just hard to use on multiple allies, which is the only thing I don't like about this feat. Unfortunately, our next level 4 feat does fully require the mythic system. When you cast a spell, you can spend a mythic point to heighten that spell to the highest rank you can cast. Any spell attack roll or DCs are calculated at mythic proficiency. However, the big thing here is that the spell slot you use to cast a spell is not changed. In other words, you can cast a fireball at 3rd level, use this feat, and cast it at 5th level, but you still only use a 3rd level slot. And although this is limited by mythic points, it's not a once per day thing. So as long as you have mythic points, you can effectively use this as much as you want. Mythic points probably aren't all that common, so you might not be able to use this all the time, but it is good to have the option of doing this, especially if you're using a damaging spell. Next up for our level 14 feats, we've got Spell Network. When you cast Spell Surge, you can use a free action to enter this stance. While you're in this stance, all allies can use other allies at the origin point for any spells they cast, calculating range and cover from the allies' position rather than their own. This also allows all allies in the area to treat other allies as if they were in touch range, since each ally is within touch range of themselves. In addition, if any ally casts a spell that would normally only affect the caster, it can target any ally in your aura instead. Not only does this not require the mythic system at all, but there are so many ways you can use this. There are tons of spells that you would only normally be able to cast on the caster. And using a touch spell at a range of 10 feet without having to use reach spell is pretty amazing. And all of this for a free action when you cast Spell Surge. It's honestly a great feat here. You should pretty much always use this feat when you go into your Spell Surge because it's not a once per day thing. I highly recommend this feat if you're going to take this archetype, especially if you happen to be a spellcaster that likes to buff their allies. Next up we have Burning Surge. As a reaction, if a creature tries to cast a spell within your Spell Surge aura, you can deal 1d6 damage per rank of the spell to that creature and all creatures adjacent to it. This requires a basic will saving throw. This damage is the same type as the spell unless the spell doesn't do damage, in which case it is mental damage. If you are using the mythic system, you can spend a mythic point to change this type of damage to acid, cold, electricity, or fire. And creatures that fail their saving throw take persistent damage of the same type as the base spell, equal to the rank of the triggering spell. Meaning if somebody tries to cast a fireball in your area, you can change it to acid, cold, or electricity damage, but if they fail to save, they're still taking persistent fire damage. The thing I don't like about this feat is it's a will saving throw. If a creature is casting spells, it more than likely has a high will save. However, this does affect all their friends around them. Friends who might have low will saves. But it is all adjacent creatures, so you do have to be careful about when you use this. But I'm also not a fan of this feat because it's just extra damage. It doesn't really do anything other than that. I mean, not that that isn't great, but I'd prefer a feat that knocked them prone or something on a failed save. This feat is kind of boring for me, to be quite honest with you. But it is good, especially if the enemy has a weakness to one type of damage that the spell deals, or acid, cold, electricity, or fire. But again, only works if they're in your spell search aura and they try to cast a spell. Not a great option here. I'm not a fan. Now let's move on to level 16 with Imbue Spell. Essentially, you can use this after you've cast a spell. But instead of the normal effects of the spell, you basically transfer a spell slot or a focus point to an ally. Doing so means the ally can release the effects of the spell within the next hour. The big thing here is that they don't need to expend a spell slot or focus points to use the spell. All attributes of the spell are determined when you cast the spell, including any spell-shaped feats used, but the origin points and any choices are made by the ally. If the spell can or must be sustained, the ally takes the action to sustain it. You also can't target yourself with this ability. If it's not used within the hour, then it's just gone. Completely gone. And you can only imbue one spell at a time. If you use this ability again, any previous immediately ends. The great thing about this is you can use it on any ally, even if they normally can't cast spells. This also allows allies to cast focus spells that they normally wouldn't be able to cast, which opens up a huge amount of possibilities. Imagine the enemy's surprise when the fighter decides, I'm going to cast Evil Eye, and then I'm going to grapple them and then hit them with my longsword. Or when the cleric can suddenly cast Cornucopia. Or even better, all of a sudden the cleric can cast Fireball. Unfortunately, this does only allow you to transfer spells like this. So I think Spell Network is actually the better feat. But this can be useful. You just have to know in what situations which feat is going to be better. Next at level 16, we've got another feat that I'm not a huge fan of with Mystical Flare. For one action, you can make all creatures in your spell search aura concealed. This works like regular concealment, so creatures outside are concealed to those within and vice versa. But you can ignore this concealment. This effect lasts until the end of your next turn, but you can sustain it indefinitely. This is another feat that doesn't require the mythic system at all, and it really shouldn't, because it's just not that great, to be honest. It says you and only you can ignore this concealment. If it only concealed you and your party members from enemies, then this would be amazing and would require mythic points more than likely. But it's you and only you. So, it's not great when allies are near you. But if you're alone, then this allows you to target enemies with spells, and they'll have a hard time affecting you. So, it's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. Next, I have a feat that I think all wild spells should take, called Rapid Switch. Now, once per round, you can sustain your spell surge as a free action to switch its effects, which you could already do for a single action, but now you can do it as a free action once per round, which is a big, big, big deal. If you're running into multiple types of enemies, switching your spell surge effect can be huge. If you're running into enemies that want to stupefy you, then you're going to want to choose Mana Well for your spell surge. But you might also have enemies that are using mental effects against you. So, once you take out the enemies that want to stupefy you, then you'll want to switch over to Interference. And this is a free action now. Next, we've got another amazing one with Recharging Transference. Again, this is level 16, and basically what it allows you to do is transfer a prepared spell slot, or focus point to an ally. Meaning, basically, you expend one of those, and then your ally gets whatever you just sacrificed. But they do have to be adjacent to you or within your spell surge aura. However, you can't use this to give an ally more focus points or spell slots than they would normally have. In addition, you can't target yourself with this ability, and only one spell slot, prepared spell, or focus spell can be transferred with each use of this ability. In other words, you can't give up like a prepared spell and a focus point and give them to multiple allies or the same ally. This one is fantastic for when an ally is low on spell slots and you are not. And in some ways, This feat is better than Abuse Spell because number one, there's no time limit on when they can use it. And number two, the only limit you have with this feat is how many spell slots you have, or focus points. So if you don't use your spells or focus spells that much, this can be an awesome teamwork option. I highly recommend this feat. Thundering Surge is pretty good burst damage, but it has a pretty bad downside. If your next action is to cast a spell, make a DC 5 flat check. On a critical success, enemies in a 10-foot burst around the target or within the spell's area of effect take sonic damage equal to twice your level with a basic fortitude save against what will probably be your spell DC, since that'll more than likely be higher. Those who fail the save are also knocked prone. On a success, they take damage equal to your level and are knocked prone on a critical failure. On a failure, the success effect is centered on you. In other words, if you fail the flat check, then everyone around you takes damage, and if they fail to save, they're knocked prone. This can be devastating if you use it at the wrong time and fail the flat check, especially if your allies are in the base Spell Surge aura, which allies are going to want to be in your Spell Surge aura. So, it's pretty bad if you fail on the check, and it's just okay if you succeed or critically succeed. I do not think this feat is worth it, and would not take it. I mean, it does knock enemies prone, which is a good thing, but I think it's too risky. Next we have what I consider to be the most broken feat in this entire archetype, Galvanize Spell. Unfortunately, this feat does require you to be mythic, completely. There's no effect on this feat that doesn't require you to be mythic. However, if you are mythic, you should definitely take this one. For a free action once per day, you can end your spell surge. Doing so allows you to cast any spell you know for one action less. In addition, once that spell resolves, you can regain that spell slot or immediately cast that spell again on the same turn. You do have to spend a mythic point to do this. However, this is literally 2 fireballs, 2 protector trees, 2 wall of forces, or even different spells. Protector tree and sanctuary, say, for a huge amount of protection. This is, by far, the most broken spellcaster feat I've ever seen, and should be locked behind mythic points. I mean, a free action, 2 spells in 1 turn, is already insane, even if they are the same spell. If you are using the mythic system, you definitely want to pick up this feat if you're a spellcaster and you take this archetype. And with Mana Detonation, you gain the Arcane Explosion focus spell. Going into this form means all creatures in a 30-foot emanation take 16d6 force damage with a basic fortitude saving throw. Creatures that fail their save are pushed 10 feet away from you. If they cannot complete this movement, they're knocked prone. However, if they reduce this movement by some other way, they don't become prone. You also gain the Incorporeal trait and are immune to disease, poison, and precision damage. You also gain resistance to all damage equal to your level, except for force, spirit, and any weapon that has the Ghost Touch property rune. This resistance is doubled against non-magical damage. While you are incorporeal, you can't strike, cast a spell, or use any actions with the Manipulate trait, but any creature that ends its turn adjacent to you takes 16d6 force damage. Dismissing this spell returns you to your normal state at full hit points. But the big thing here is that you return to your normal form at full hit points, which it makes this great for when you're low on health. You can't strike and you can't cast spells, but you can do a lot of other things this archetype allows you to do. For example, you can transfer your spells. You can extend your spell surge aura. You can keep your spell surge aura going, even change the effects. There's a lot of things you can still do with this up, but the important thing is once you end it, you're back up to full hit points. And again, this is another feat that doesn't require the mythic system at all. As I said in the beginning, there are a lot of feats in this archetype that are like that. And lastly, at level 18, we have Mythic Counter, which again is one that requires the mythic system. When you attempt to counteract a spell, you can spend a mythic point to do it at mythic proficiency. In addition, if the target is in your spell surge aura, then any critical failures you get are treated as failures, which means you will never automatically fail a counteract check unless the rank of the spell is higher than the rank of your counteract check. Not a huge fan of this one, mainly because counteracting spells is not that big a deal, to be honest. I mean, you're not going to run into a huge amount of spellcasters in Pathfinder 2e, even in Mythic play. Which means counteracting spells just isn't that good, to be honest with you. It is way too situational. But if you do like counteracting spells, this is a feat you want to take. If you're in Mythic play, it's completely pointless if you're not in Mythic play. If your GM is throwing a bunch of spellcasters at you, countering their spells can be good. But in most games, you're never going to use this. Now let's talk level 20 feats, starting with Mystical Life Force. If your dying or doomed condition would increase to a high enough level to actually kill you, it doesn't increase. In addition, anything that would insta-kill you brings you to 0 hit points instead. In addition, if you would die for any reason, you transform into a magical font attached to an allied creature within 1 mile. That creature gains the knowledge of the embodied font ritual to allow you to come back to your normal form. Until you're restored, once per hour, you can cast Spell Surge centered on that creature. You still make all the choices for Spell Surge and can use actions allowed by the spell, but you can take no other actions. So you can use things like Expand Surge or Invigorating Surge, but you can't cast spells, strike, move, anything like that. And that's only once per hour. So, you probably want to go back to your corporal form as soon as possible, even if you use this feat. But sometimes that's not the case, so at least you can do something, rather than just sit there and be a font. For the ritual, if the creature critically succeeds on the check, you come back with full hit points, a mythic point, and as if you had just done your daily preparations. If they regularly succeed, you still come back at full hit points and a mythic point, but all your spell slots are expended. If they fail the check, then you still come back with full hit points and a mythic point, but you are Clumsy 1, Drained 1, Doomed 1, and Enfeebled 1 for 1 week. If they critically fail on the check, then you don't come back, and you can't come back for another week. This ritual requires a whole bunch of magic items, and they are consumed no matter how well they do on the check. But this is also a level 20 feat, which means magic items worth 2,000 GP isn't all that much at that level, to be honest. You can probably get that pretty easily at that level. But since most people aren't even going to get to that level, this is a feat that is it's really, really good, but most people aren't going to be able to use it. Surging Interference is another feat that's about countering spells, which again, I'm not a huge fan of. I like the other level 20 feat better. But anyway, for a reaction, when a creature attempts to cast a spell in your Spell Surge aura, you can attempt to counteract the spell. If successful, you regain 1 8th level or lower spell slot. And if you're using the Mythic system, then you can spend a mythic point when using this to get back a 9th rank or lower spell. While this is certainly better than Mythic Counter, again, it's situational. Unless your character is built around countering spells, you're probably never going to use this. And even if your character is built around countering spells, your GM is not going to throw many enemy spellcasters at you. It's kind of it's a situational feat that just isn't that good. And that's the Wildspell archetype done. When I first read the name of this, I thought it was going to be more like a wild magic sorcerer or something along those lines. But I do like this archetype because it focuses on making spellcasters better, a lot better, especially if you are using the mythic system. And it doesn't just make your spells better, it makes everyone's spells better. Sadly, including your enemies, for certain feats. But if you have a full spellcasting party, this archetype is amazing, flat out. And even if you don't, you can still build this so that you can help your team, because a lot of these feats allow non-spellcasters to use spells, which is already just amazing. But if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more Pathfinder 2e teamwork content. You can also check out the links in the description below for my Patreon, my Discord, and my social media. If you want Google Sheets for all my teamwork builds, check out the Patreon page. And if you guys want to see what I think are the best spells for each tradition, you can check out these videos here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.